Chapter 16 of Flemington. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nan Dodge. Flemington by Violet Jacob. Chapter 16. The Two Ends of the Line. 3 days afterwards, Wattie sat at the gates of Ardguys and looked between the pale yellow ash trees at the house. There was nobody about at the moment to forbid his entrance, and he drove quietly in at a foot's pace and approached the door. The sun shone with the clear lightness of autumn, and the leaves, which had almost finished the fitful process of falling, lay gathered in heaps by the gate, for Madam Flemington liked order. On the steep pitch of the ancient slate roof a few pigeons, white and grey, sat in pairs or walked about with spasmodic dignity. The whole made a picture, high in tone like a watercolour, and the clean etched lines of the stripped branches gave it a sharp delicacy and threw up the tall light walls. All these things were lost upon the beggar. He had informed himself in Forfarshire. He knew that the place was owned and lived in by a lady of the name of Flemington, who was the grandmother of the young man from whom he had lately parted. He had learned nothing of her character and politics because of the seclusion in which she lived, and he stared about him on every side and scanned the house for any small sign that might give him a clue to the tastes or occupations of its inhabitant. Whilst he was so engaged, the front door opened, and the sound sent all the pigeons whirling from the roof into the air in flashes of grey-blue and white. Madam Flemington stood on the top step. The beggar's hand went instinctively to his bonnet. He was a little taken aback, why he did not know, and he instantly abandoned his plan of an emotional description of Archie's plight. She stood quite still, looking down at him. Her luxuriant silver hair was covered by a three-cornered piece of black lace that was tied in a knot under her chin, and she wore the calash or hood with which the ladies of those days protected their headdresses when they went out. A short furred cloak was round her. She considered Wattie with astonishment. Then she beckoned to him to approach. "Who and what are you?" she asked, laying her hand on the railing that encircled the landing of the steps. That question was so seldom put to him that it struck him unawares, like a stone from behind a hedge. He hesitated. "I've got news for your leddyship," he began. "I asked your name," said Madam Flemington. "Wattie Caird," replied he. "Skirling Wattie, they call me." The countryside and its inhabitants did not appeal to Christian, but this amazing intruder was like no one she had ever seen before. She guessed that he was a beggar, and she brushed aside his announcement of news as merely a method of attracting attention. "You are one of the few persons in these parts who can afford to keep a coach," she remarked. A broad smile overspread his ribald countenance, like the sun irradiating a public house. "Dod, my lady, I'd think shame to visit ye on foot," said he, with a wag of his head. "You have better reasons than that," she replied rather grimly. "Ay, ay, they're baith awa'," said he, looking at the place where his leg should have been. "I'm an ill sicht for the Salters." She threw back her head and laughed a little. She had seen no one for months with the exception of Archie, who was so quick in mind and speech, and the humour of this vagabond on wheels took her fancy. There was no whining servility about him, in spite of his obvious profession. The horrified face of a maidservant appeared for one moment at a window, then vanished, struck back by the unblessed sight of her mistress, that paralysing, unapproachable power, jesting, apparently, with Skirling Wattie, the lowest of the low. The girl was a native of Forfarshire, the westernmost part of the beggar's travels, and she had often seen him in the streets. "You face life boldly," said Madam Flemington. "And what for no? Fegs, greetin' fills nobody's kyte." She laughed again. "You shall fill yours handsomely," said she. "Go to the other door, and I will send orders to the women to attend to you." "Ay, will I," he exclaimed, "but as wasna just for a piece that came all the way frae the Muir o' Rossie." "From where?" said she. "The Muir of Rossie," repeated he. "My leddy, it was awa' yonder at the tail o' the Muir that I tell't Maister Flemington the road to Aberbrothock." "Mr. Flemington?" "Ay, yon lad Flemington, and a divil of a lad he is to tak' the road with. My leddy, there's been a pucklie feckin' about Montrose, and the Prince's men hae gotten a haud o' King George's ship that's in by Ferryden. As I gaed down to the toon, I capit wi' Flemington i' the road. He gotten a clour on his head. He was fechtin' doon aboot Inchbrayock, he tell't me." "Fighting? With whom?" asked Madam Flemington, fixing her tiger's eyes on him. The beggar had watched her face narrowly while he spoke for the slightest flicker of expression that might indicate the way her feelings were turning. "He was fechtin' wi' Captain Logie," he continued boldly. "A fell man, yon. Ye'll ken him, your leddyship?" "By name," said Christian. "I'm thinking it was frae him that he got the clour on his heed. I gie'd him on my guid whisky bottle, and I got water to him frae a well. I ca'd him awa' frae the roadside. He didna ken what will be after him, ye see, and I garred a clatterin' auld wife at the Muir side gie's a shelter yon nicht. I didna leave the callant, my leddy, till I got a shelt to him. He's in Edinburgh. I tell't him what get him a passage to Leith. I'm an Aberbrothock man mysel', ye ken." "And did he send you to me?" "Ay, did he," said he, lying boldly. There was no sign of emotion, none even of surprise on her face. Her heart had beaten hard as the beggar talked, and the weight of wrath and pain that she had carried since she had parted with Archie began to lighten. He had listened to her, he had not gone against her. How deep her words had fallen into his heart she could not tell, but deep enough to bring him to grips with the man who had made the rift between them. "Are you sure of what you say?" she asked quickly. "Did you see them fight?" "Na, na, but 'twas the lad himsel' that tell't me. He was on the ship." "He was on the ship?" "Ay, was he, and he gaed oot wi' the sodgers to deave thae rebels frae Inchbrayock. They got the ship, my leddy, but they didna get him. He escapit." "Did you say he was much hurt?" said Madam Flemington. "Hoots, ye needna fash yoursel', my leddy. I was feared for him in the nicht, but there wasna muckle wrang wi' him when he gaed awa', or dad, I wouldna hae left him." He had no mind to spoil his presentment of himself as Good Samaritan. So far he had learnt nothing. He had spoken of the Prince's men as rebels without a sign of displeasure showing on Madam Flemington's face. Archie might be playing a double game, and she might be doing the same, but there was nothing to suggest it. She was magnificently impersonal. She had not even shown the natural concern that he expected with regard to her own flesh and blood. "Go now," said she, waving her hand towards the back of the house. "You shall feed well, you and your dogs, and when you have finished you can come to these steps again, and I will give you some money. You have done well by me." She re-entered the house, and he drove away to the kitchen door, dismissed. If Wattie hoped to discover anything more there about the lady and her household, he was disappointed. The servants raised their chins in refined disapproval of the vagrant upon whom their mistress had seen fit to waste words under the very front windows of Ardguys. They resolved that he should find the back door, socially, a different place, and only the awe in which they stood of Christian compelled them to obey her to the letter. A crust or two would have interpreted her wishes had they dared to please themselves. But Madam Flemington knew every resource of her larder and kitchen, for French housekeeping and the frugality of her exiled years had taught her thrift. She would measure precisely what had been given to her egregious guest, down to the bones laid by her order before his dogs. The beggar ate in silence amid the brisk cracking made by 5 pairs of busy jaws. The maids were in the stronghold of the kitchen, far from the ungenteel sight of his coarse enjoyment. When he had satisfied himself, he put the fragments into his leathern bag and went round once more to the front of the house. A window was open on the ground floor, and Madam Flemington's large white hand came over the sill, holding a couple of crown pieces. She was sitting on the window seat within. Her cloak and the calash had disappeared, and Wattie could see the fine poise of her head. She dropped the coin into the cart as he drove below. As he looked up, he thought that if she had been imposing in her outer garments, she was 100-fold more so without them. He was at his ease with her, but he wondered at it, though he was accustomed to being at his ease with everybody. A certain vanity rose in him, coarse remnant of humanity as he was, before this magnificent woman, and when he had received the silver, he turned about, facing her, and began to sing. He was used to the plebeian admiration of his own public, but a touch of it from her would have a different flavour. He was vain of his singing, and that vanity was the one piece of romance belonging to him. It hung over his muddy soul as a weaving of honeysuckle may hang over a dank pond. Had he understood Madam Flemington perfectly, he might have sung "The Tod," but as he only understood her superficially, he sang "Logie Kirk." He did not know how nearly the extremities of the social scale can draw together in the primitive humours of humanity. It is the ends of a line that can best be bent to meet, not one end and the middle. Yet, as Logie Kirk ran out among the spectral ash trees, she sat still, astonished, her head erect like some royal animal listening. It moved her, though its sentiment had naught to do with her mood at present, nor with her cast of mind at any time. But love and loss are things that lay their shadows everywhere, and Madam Flemington had lost much. Moreover, she had been a woman framed for love, and she had not wasted her gifts. As his voice ceased, she rose and threw the window up higher. "Go on," she said. He paused, taking breath for a couple of minutes. He knew songs to suit all political creeds, but this time he would try one of the Jacobite lays that were floating round the country. If it should provoke some illuminating comment from her, he would have learned something more about her, and incidentally about Archie, though it struck him that he was not so sure of the unanimity of interest between the grandmother and grandson which he had taken for granted before seeing Madam Flemington. His cunning eyes were rooted on her as he sang again. My love stood at the loaning side and held me by the hand, the bonniest lad that e'er did bide in all this waefu' land. There's but ae bonnier to be seen frae Pentland to the sea, and for his sake but yestereen I sent my love from me. I gied my love the white, white rose that's at my faither's wa'. It is the bonniest flower that grows where ilka flower is braw. There's but ae brawer than I ken frae Perth unto the main, and that's the flower of Scotland's men that's fechtin' for his ain. If I had kept whate'er was mine as I had gied my best, my heart were licht by day and syne, the nicht wad bring me rest. There is nae heavier heart to find from Forfarshire to Ayr. As I sit me doon to mind on him, I see nae mair. Lad, gin ye fa' by Charlie's side to rid this land of shame, there will not be a prouder bride than her ye left at hame. But I will see ye whaur ye sleep, Fra lowlands to the peat, and ilka nicht at mirk I'll creep to lay me at your feet." "You sing well," said Christian when he had stopped. "Now go." She inclined her head and turned from the window. As his broad back, so grotesque in its strange nearness to the ground, passed out between the gateposts of Ardguys, she went over to the mantelpiece. Her face was set, and she stood with clasped hands, gazing into the fireplace. She was deeply moved, but not by the song, which only stirred her to bitterness, but by the searching tones of the becker's voice that had smitten a way through which her feelings surged to and from her heart. The thought that Archie had not utterly broken away from her unnerved her by the very relief it brought. She had not known till now how much she had suffered from what had passed between them. Her power was not all gone. She was not quite alone. She would have scorned to admit that she could not stand in complete isolation, and she admitted nothing, even to herself. She only stood still, her nerves quivering, making no outward sign. Presently she rang a little handbell that was on the table. The genteel-minded maid appeared. "Mysie," said Madam Flemington, "in 3 days I shall go to Edinburgh." End of chapter 16.